On the phone, Naomi Wolf, her latest book, The End of America, Letter of a Warning to a Young Patriot. And you can check out AmericanFreedomCampaign.org, AmericanFreedomCampaign.org for more information on the warning to young patriots. So, Naomi, we are talking about you have listed at least, I think, maybe 6 out of 10 steps that societies, or I guess would-be despots, take in moving to a full totalitarian state, I guess, or dictatorship. And the ones that you invoke, at least, are fairly obvious in terms of steps that are headed in that way. You were talking about the assault on the press, not just the chilling effect, but literally the imprisonment. And you were mentioning a couple of examples.
Yeah, thank you. And let me just remind people, because we're so blessed with, having had over 200 years of a strong democracy, we really kind of don't know the ABCs of how democracies close down and how fragile they are. But there are shades of gray between a dictatorship and most of us don't realize what democracy activists all over the world realize, which is that there are warning signs. There are classic time-tested steps that in Pakistan and around the world, people kind of recognize, oh my Lord, the president has made it easier to declare martial law. That's a classic step. Or, oh, wow, okay, now they've passed a law making it easier to seize the assets of critics of the Iraq War. That's a classic step. Or, okay, now they're going after journalists. That's a classic step. So it's very important for Americans who tend not to be historically minded to have this primer about sort of the blueprint for closing down a society. So what we were talking about was Bill Keller, the publisher of the New York Times, and your listeners may remember that a year or so ago, when the New York Times ran the scoops about the warrantless wiretapping, the president was outraged and said it was a disgrace, and there was this drumbeat of calls for Bill Keller to be tried for treason or tried under the 1917 Espionage Act. Well, this is, if you know history, this is one of those classic turning points when criticism is recast as treason or espionage. And it's very dangerous because, well, first of all, historically, the publisher of Izvestia, I beg your pardon, the editor of Izvestia, Nikolai Bakunin, was actually accused of treason in the Moscow show trials and executed. So, the scary thing about reading The End of America is that there's so many such echoes that it really seems as if someone has, read the historical record and kind of chosen, they're like historical fingerprints over all kinds of current events. But even scarier is that in our own country, the 1917 Espionage Act was used to round up activists, labor leaders, socialists, teachers, journalists, editors, here in America, and hold them without warrants and beat them in some cases. Eugene Debs was given a 10-year prison sentence under the Espionage Act for giving a speech about the Constitution. So, and it managed to quell dissent for a decade in the United States. So it's got a very, very dark history, and most of us are not aware of that. So yes, to invoke the Espionage Act against the publisher of the New York Times, or the charge of treason, and if you're guilty of treason, execution is the result. Is very, very serious. And again, you and I are like, well, that's rhetoric, it's hype. In a strong democracy, it's just rhetoric. But I promise you, the day after, a journalist or an editor actually gets a 10-year sentence under the 1917 Espionage Act, you and I are going to be having a different conversation, because that's how societies close down. People see an example of someone really getting into they voluntarily pull back. I know I'm not brave enough to have this conversation after a successful prosecution under the Espionage Act.